Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the McKinney number T4A3786. This is a 4.5 by 4.5 hinge in an oil rubbed bronze finish. That's what the they say 10B on here. We have it as 640. 640 is a more accurate way to call this hinge oil rubbed bronze because it's made of steel. So let's take the hinge out and take a look at it. Immediately it looks more like a 10R color. Yeah, I'm not real thrilled with this oil rubbed color. It looks okay at a certain angle, but this is a bit too antique for my liking. But nonetheless, oil rub bronze on steel is really a, it's making the best of a situation. Oil rubbed bronze is meant to be on a bronze base material, not on steel. So they're really dealing with an imperfect sort of process, I suppose, to get a result on a base material that it wasn't meant. Well, not that it wasn't meant to, but it wasn't originally thought of as being oil rubbed. Doesn't look so bad there. Anyway, let's talk about this hinge. This is a T4A3786. This is a 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch. Let's talk about the size first, and then we're going to look at the product data. It's 4.5 inch. That's the height. Okay, it's important to know that the height is the first dimension, and then the width is the second dimension. Okay, so it's 4.5 by 4.5. It's not 4.5 by 4.5. It's just important to know the height is always the first dimension. And while you can get away not knowing that with a square hinge, but if you had like a 6 by 4.5 or a 3.5 by 6, it would be important to know which is the first dimension, which is the height. And that is indeed the first dimension. 4.5, 4.5 is, of course, the very typical hinge for your 1 3/4 thick doors. A lot of times 4.5 by 4.5 is used when a 4.5 by 4 would be a good choice, especially when you are wrapping the wall. It would be nice to be able to have that vertical axis of pivoting drawn back as close to the door face and the frame face as possible. Let's take a little closer analysis on that exact sort of concept. Okay, now what we are really saying about that sort of concept is when you have you have a frame. Okay, you have your hinge prep here. You obviously are going to have your door. Okay, the dimension from the hinge leaf to the center, or the vertical axis of pivoting, a plumb line if you would imagine it, is half of the width of the hinge at 2 1/4 inch. Okay, if you have a scenario where you are wrapping your wall with your studs, that would be okay, but it might be also nice to move that back in a little bit and then use a 4-inch wide hinge, because 4.5 inch wide is actually unnecessarily too wide. So it's nice to be able to draw that back. Okay. However, if you're dealing with a situation where you have a wall like this, okay, and you have used whatever, T-anchors, okay, you're going to need to think about that vertical axis of pivoting. A 4.5 inch may not be appropriate. You might need to get it out here and go with a 4.5 by 6 so that when the door opens, it will actually have enough room to get up and out and over. Okay, so be mindful of what that vertical axis of pivoting will be. Again, if you are wrapping the wall, consider a 4-inch wide hinge. It's a cleaner look, less projecting hardware. And if you have, let's say, 8-inch block and a 5 3/4 frame, and your client is saying, I need that to go to 180 degrees, you're going to need to think about that vertical axis of pivoting. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. From the manufacturer's page, we can pull up the product catalog and get a closer, get a better overall view of what the T4A3786 is. If we search our document here for that hinge, we're going to find the 3786 37 versus 3333. 37 is a steel-based hinge. Okay, so our part number is going to change when we have a non-ferrous base material. The difference between T4A3386 stainless and T4A3386 brass is going to be how you specify the available finishes, seen on page 29. So, whatever, wherever page 29 is, so if you had this hinge and it was going to be US 32D, it would obviously be made of stainless. If it was US 10B, it would obviously be made of brass, is what it would be made of. Down here they list the sizes, and that's nice. They show us that 4-inch wide hinge that we do like. If you're dealing with a 3'6", a 3'8", a 4.0 door, a 5-inch tall hinge would certainly be considered best practice, so definitely consider that as the proper sort of hinge to use. And then when you get to thicker doors, you'll get out to 5-inch wide, maybe 6-inch wide. 8x8's a pretty epic hinge. I've seen those before. A heavyweight 8x8 hinge, that's a thick door, and it's a lot of door. Recently did a project for a client where they ordered 40 of them. The hinge, the door thickness was about 3.5 inch. I don't recall it. They may have been 3 inch. I don't really know the degree of opening that they needed to accommodate and what their hinge back set was going to be. But they were pretty nice. Again, you're getting into a thicker door, but a heavier door. The height is the important dimension. The height of the hinge is, and I think why they call it out first, is because that's more of a guide or a clue or a tip-off as to how epic is this door? How large is the door? How heavy is it? What preparation will you put on the door and frame? The width of the hinge is really only important when you're trying to determine what sort of dimension you need here, and that, which is very important. But the first thing I want to know is how high of a hinge do I need? How tall of a hinge? Okay, so that chart is very handy. Over here, you're going to see options that can be done. Non-removable pin, which is going to give you a set screw in the barrel of the hinge, so as to all but eliminate the driving of the pin out. If this was an exterior door that swung out, you would have access to that pin, allowing you to possibly drive it out of the barrel. So you would definitely want a non-removable pin in that scenario. T4B is obviously, T4A is definitely ball bearing, and that's the hinge type that you're going to end up getting with this. The TCA, concealed bearing, that's a nice clean look. You don't see these bearing packets here. Concealed bearings are when you are looking for a cleaner look. Okay, it's absolutely a cleaner look and a more efficient hinge. Radiused corners, if for some reason you wanted to put a radius corner on here, you certainly could. I sold some hinges to a guy in somewhere in Belgium. I don't know that it was Amsterdam, but somewhere around that area. Heavyweight, 4.5, 5/8 radius. Why do you need that? He's like, well, I've got a wood frame, a wood door, and that's what they used. I just want a tougher hinge, a thicker hinge. Hospital tip, ball tip, steeple tip, very different tips. Hospital tip is where they're going to take this barrel and they're going to, a hospital tip is when they're going to take that barrel of that hinge. Okay. And they're going to aggressively grind that down. They're going to get rid of all this area. And that prevents someone from looping or hanging something on top of the hinge. It's ligature resistant is the point. Ball tip and steeple tip, those are just decorative tips. A ball tip would be is the most common of tips. Steeple tip looks like a steeple that you'd see on top of a structure. Safety stud feature goes along with non-removable pin in that they're going to, on the hinge leaf itself, they're going to, you've got your holes, okay? They're going to put a disc here, about the size maybe of a nickel, probably a little bit bigger, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. They're going to put a disc here, okay, solid disc. Then over here they're going to put a hole so that when you close the hinge, that disc goes into the hole. Let's say you drive the pin out, doesn't matter, you still can't separate the leaves. That's where that's going to be used, that safety stud feature. I have seen in the Miami airport, they have NRP and safety stud solutions. They can do, obviously, wire transfer. 2 through 12 wires are available. They can do concealed circuit, where you are obviously doing some reporting on the hinge. Magnetic monitoring, again, reporting on the hinge. You want to know exactly the condition or the disposition of that hinge. Where is it? Is the door opened or closed? Okay, so a really great document that they have here from McKinney explaining this hinge. Let's take a little closer visual review of the hinge now. Okay, now this hinge is a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves here, and here, that when they're brought parallel, the leaves are meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. That's a full mortise hinge. Okay, there are different types of hinges: full mortise, half surface, full surface, and all of them are different because of, well, the leaf is a different shape possibly, but the swag on the hinge leaf changes. This is a 5-knuckle hinge. You can see why we would call that. It's a heavyweight hinge, and in a 4.5 inch height, it's 180 thousandths thick, and it would have 4 bearing packets. A heavyweight will have 4 bearing packets, whereas a standard weight will have 2 bearing packets. Should be 180 thousandths. Let's take a look at that. My caliper tells me 0.183 thick. There is a link below this video to the template that will show you the location of the screw holes. Speaking of the holes, screws are included in a complimentary finish. Okay, so all wood screws and all machine screws will be included. Absolutely indicate when ordering the hinge in the comment field. Indicate the type or the makeup of the screws that you would like. It would be handy to pass that information to the manufacturer so that they know what you need. It's not always that you'll get all machine screws and all wood screws. Oftentimes, customer calls and says, I don't have enough wood screws. Okay, well, what's your door made of? Wood. What's your frame made of? Wood. Yeah, you don't have enough wood screws because they'll send all machine and then only half wood screws. So clarify that. Wood door, wood frame, not as common as steel door, steel frame, but certainly possible. So define that. So there's no reason that you're looking for a very unusual screw in an even more unusual finish. So that link to the template will show you. Now that link to the template will show you the T4A series hinges, along with many other hinges as well. And that's really because, the dimensions are really only what changes when it comes to the width of the hinge. Of course, all those other part numbers are listed there because, whether it be a TEA 2714 or a T4A3786, it's still a 4.5 hinge. The location of the screw holes are all the same. And they give you the thickness, and they give you the other important dimensions. They give you the outside diameter of the barrel, should that be of importance to you. Which it might be. You might get real close to a conflict with an adjoining wall or a wall where you're doing some sort of an not odd, but you're trying to bury the hinge as much as possible. You might want to know how far out that barrel is going to, come from its center line. Okay, whatever the reason might be. So that template is very handy. Nice quality company, McKinney. They make hinges. They make other things than hinges, but it's primarily hinges. Continuous hinges. McKinney's been around for probably 100 years, and they were certainly known as a wrought iron company. There's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can review not only all of the McKinney products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog, the current one, and there's one that's from 1929 that will show you their iron forged hardware. Once upon a time, McKinney was also involved in commercial restroom accessories, soap dispensers, paper towel dispensers, grab bars. In the early 90s, people would still be asking for that material, and actually, I just got a call in 2019, someone looking for something. I don't have a catalog that that is from the 80s about their commercial restroom equipment, so I really can't speak to it, but customers would walk in and need a spindle for a McKinney product. So that material's long in the past. There's probably very little of it left, although there might be tons of it left. Who knows? Who's to say? Wrapping this up, they've got their ASA Abloy logo. They have the UL stamp that's on there. Not all hinges are UL stamped, and that's because they don't need to be. They need to be listed, which means they've been tested, they've been found to be in compliance with the fire test, and that evidence of that, the record of that, needs to be on file with the testing laboratory. If you were to contact UL and you were to give them the manufacturer name and number, you would ultimately have access to that information. If you were doing a fire door audit on doors and you wanted to be sure that the hinges that were used met the criteria and requirements for a fire-rated opening, that's what you're going to end up doing. You see a UL stamp on a hinge like this, and you probably don't need to go any further. However, you're probably not going to see stamps, UL stamps, or the F on a hinge because they're not required to be labeled. They have to be listed to be used on a fire door, but they don't have to be labeled, whereas other hardware, like an exit device, needs to be labeled. Spring hinges, however, need to be labeled. They need to be they need to bear evidence that they've passed the test. There's a lot of spring hinges in the world that haven't. So be mindful if you're using a spring hinge on a fire-rated door that it bear a visual affirmation that it's been tested. Okay. I would like it if the logo was a little bit smaller. I don't like corporate advertising on my hardware when I can avoid it. But nonetheless, there you go. They even finished the back of the hinge to a certain extent, I suppose. Not every manufacturer does that either. Great quality, great caliber hinge. It's going to hold a heavy door. Any questions on the McKinney T4A3786, ball bearing heavyweight 4.5 in a 640 finish, or any other McKinney product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you very much.